Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Give me one sec. Waiting on everybody to roll in here, and we'll get this show started. Okay, it looks like Trump is actually speaking live, so we're going to go over there right now because it is pertaining to this new deal that he ended up signing with Saudi Arabia. It was for both economic and then also military agreement, which is really key, and I'm going to explain why here in just a minute, but let's listen to what's going on.
We're looking at it. Look, the EU is very smart, but they really have taken advantage of the United States. They were formed for the purpose of taking advantage of the United States, and I don't blame them, and I don't blame China. I don't blame anybody. I blame the people that were sitting at that desk in that other beautiful Oval Office for allowing it to happen. Many presidents I blame. They should have never allowed it to happen. And I'm doing something that a lot of them wouldn't want to do. But I'm here, I do those things, and we're going to make this country great again. We were taken advantage of by almost everybody. I sat back in the last administration. I would actually read them. I don't have to read them now. I know them so well. I would read some of these documents that were signed, deals, and I said, who would do a deal like this? Who would do it? You've seen it, Elon. Yeah. I'd look at deals where it's so one-sided. Even we have a deal with Japan, and we get along great with Japan, and we had the Prime Minister here. He was fantastic. As you know, Abe was great. Shinzo was great. He was a good friend of mine, unfortunately no longer with us. But we defend them, but they don't have to defend us. I said, that doesn't sound too good. But we have a deal, where a defense deal. We pay hundreds of billions of dollars to defend them. But if for any reason, in other words, we pay all the money. They don't pay anything. But if we're ever attacked, they don't have to do a thing to protect us. I said, oh, that sounds like a wonderful deal. So that's just one out of thousands. And I just wonder who did this. And it's people that either hate our country or didn't care, an expression that you use. I think it's really a lot of them didn't care.
I'm not quite sure what the hell is going on there. Listen, let's just go jump back in because he's over in Saudi Arabia right now, and that's coming from Times Now, and they said that this is his cabinet meeting, which I don't know if he's holding his cabinet meeting over in Saudi Arabia. I highly doubt it. So I feel like that's just nothing at all. Listen, before we get going, I want to give you guys a little bit of a comment. I'm just letting you guys know right now that this isn't real. Like, what I'm about to put on your screen isn't real. It's AI. Carl Higbee shared it this morning. You guys know I like Carl. And it's just hilarious.
Flopping off someone's ding-a-ling doesn't make them a woman, it makes them a eunuch. But you already knew that, right? So, as I was saying, George Soros, Bill Gates, and many more are pursuing a depopulation agenda. Very inappropriate. Poison in the food, fake medicine, endocrine disruptors, psych meds, and mass immigration. They want to turn your kids gay, retarded, or both. David Hogg, Harry Sisson, and that one fat chick are the prototypes. Very off-putting. I don't often say the word yuck, but I think it fits here. Conspiracy theories, for the most part, are simply spoiler alerts. Alex Jones, paragon of truth and justice, has been saying these sorts of things for years, and it's high time we start paying attention.
Oh, God. Yeah, obviously, it's a freaking fake video, ladies and gentlemen. I love all the AI stuff. Yeah, AI is getting out of control. You know, I look at AI and the direction it's going, and it's kind of creepy. I was having a discussion the other day about, God, it's so freaking weird. Like there is these different AI dolls. I guess, like, when you start talking about issues with sick individuals and people that are messed up in the head, I don't know if you guys have seen like the technology of where women dolls are, like female companions, but these things are supposed to be rolling out in the near future. And there's guys that are like, dude, if I can get like a hot robot freaking wife, then I don't need an actual woman anymore. And there's people that are actually out there pumping their fists being like, yeah, dating's about to be done because of this. It's so ridiculous. Anyways, insert name here. If Pakistan and India go into a full-on war, do you think China will help Pakistan, which would cause India to hit China, causing another war? Yeah, I mean, it is very possible. But I don't know, as far as like China helping Pakistan by proxy, I don't think is a big deal. Countries do that crap all the time. We were in a proxy war with Russia over inside of Syria for a very long period of time. Obviously, we're in a proxy war with Russia over inside of Ukraine, along with a ton of other freaking countries. And China had supplied certain tech already to Pakistan. So if they end up helping them out like via proxy like that, like, no, I don't think it's a big deal. If they start supplying them and Pakistan was doing things like what the Houthis are doing and everything, yeah, that would be a much bigger problem. So I don't think it's that big of an issue if you're asking me about that in particular. Now, I want to talk to you guys about Saudi Arabia and what is currently going on over there, because Trump showed up over there, and this is like him rolling in, and he ended up signing a very strategic agreement with Saudi Arabia. And the reason this is such a big deal I'm just going to play this. This is the national anthem, right? And I'm going to turn it way down so you guys can hear me. The reason this is such a big deal, right? This deal with Saudi Arabia, the reason this is such a big deal is because they supply about 17% of the world's oil. 17% of the world's oil passes through Saudi Arabia. And I've talked to you guys before about BRICS nations and how big of a freaking threat that is to the US dollar. And I know some of you guys are probably saying, Matt, it's inappropriate for you to talk over the national anthem. Yeah, it's a recording and we're not there, so get over it. 17%, 16 to 17% of the oil exports, like crossing international borders, passes through Saudi Arabia. That is a huge chunk. And last year, BRICS asked Saudi Arabia to join. And to my knowledge, they haven't answered back yet. And so by us signing a strategic energy agreement with them, all of a sudden, we are setting BRICS back. It goes into affecting the freaking dollar. This is a bigger deal than people actually believe. And we, ladies and gentlemen, I feel like I need the American flag behind me right now. So when I look at this, and I look at this from the outside perspective of why did this happen? Now, there was also a part that ended up going into the national defense or defense agreement, to where I'm sure the details of all of this are going to come out. And we're talking about like hundreds of billions in freaking like arms sales and different sales and things like that going up over to Saudi Arabia. Where's Nate? Nate can come on. Everybody calm down. Nate, they're calling for you, bud. So I know you're watching. You know what? I'm going to send Nate a message, because maybe this is one of the things where I just want to bring Nate in directly. The people are calling for Nate, so I just shot him a message to see if Nate is able to come on. And if he is, we'll get him up and over here in just a sec. So this is kind of a big deal. When we start talking about it, we start talking about them signing, and I'm going to break all of this stuff down. And I'm also going to talk to you guys a little bit about some of the information that's going around already that's going into this. This is some of Trump's remarks.
Starting with a memorandum of understanding between the Ministry of Energy and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the U.S. Department of Energy for cooperation in the field of energy. From the Saudi side, His Royal Highness Prince Abdulaziz bin Salman bin Abdulaziz, Minister of Energy. From the U.S. side, His Excellency Mr. Chris Wright, Secretary of Energy. Starting with a memorandum.
That is signing the memorandum for energy. Now, everybody is talking about why Pete Hegseth ended up canceling his trip over to Israel. Why would Pete need to do that? There's a lot of people that are really pissed off about Pete canceling his trip to Israel. That's misinformation. He didn't cancel it. He rescheduled it. And likely Donald Trump is going to be going to Israel with Pete Hegseth on his Middle East tour.
Next, a letter of intent between the Ministry of Defense of Saudi Arabia and the U.S. Department of Defense regarding the modernization and development of the capabilities of the Saudi armed forces through future defense capabilities. From the Saudi side, His Royal Highness Prince Khalid bin Salman bin Abdulaziz, Minister of Defense. From the U.S. side, His Excellency Mr. Pete Hegseth, Secretary of Defense.
Right. So now it's becoming a little bit more clear why Pete Hegseth had to reschedule his trip over into Israel, because this is likely going to be a very, very big deal. The information, the details on exactly what they signed haven't came out yet, but I'm sure they will here in the very near future. So don't worry, everybody calm down on that one. Here is Trump. There we go. Let's see. Here they are signing their series of agreements. I want to hear what Trump has to say about this, though. So give me 1 sec here, and let's spin it up.
As you know, we have the biggest business leaders in the world here. And they're going to walk away with a lot of checks for a lot of things that you're going to provide. And in the United States, it's, as you know, we have the biggest business leaders in the world here. And they're going to walk away with a lot of checks for a lot of things that you're going to provide. And in the United States, it's probably 2 million jobs that we're talking about this visit. So, number one, I like visiting with you, and we've known each other very well, and I really believe we like each other a lot. And number two, for the United States, we've brought tremendous investment in and tremendous jobs, and we'll continue to service your great country very well. As you know, we
So there goes Trump expressing his affection for the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, who we're going to get into here in just a minute, because he's got his own little shady past that most people are not kind of happy about. I'm going to open up the Discord while all of this is going down, and I am going to I'm going to actually bring up Nate here in just a sec. So Nate, I know you're watching the show. Feel free to send me those messages so I can get you up over here. In the meantime, what I also want to talk about is I want to talk about why this is such a huge deal. So number one, we ended up announcing, all right, that Saudi Arabia provides what 16 to 70% of the freaking oil crossing international borders, right? So they are a very, 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 very large exporter of oil. With them trying to, or with BRICS trying to scoop in Saudi Arabia, obviously, this would be a massive blow to BRICS. So BRICS is I think, pretty much going to be out of the question at this point. And if Saudi Arabia ever does join BRICS, at least we have an agreement signed now when it goes down to the energy exports. I told you guys, if BRICS nations end up getting their own currency and they all agree to trade in that one currency, or just agree that, let's say, Saudi Arabia decides not to trade on the US dollar or the petrodollar, well, shit, that's a problem. The US dollar is going to take a massive freaking hit. All right, across the freaking board. So we're not going to be playing those games. This is a huge strategic setup in order to make that happen. And I'm very, very happy that we've got that. Now, I've got Nate pulled up on the screen right here. Let me see if I can get him up over here. Nate, can you hear me, sir?
I can hear you.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Do me a favor. Let me get an audio check from you real quick.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. I got you loud and clear. All right. What do we think, Nate? What do we think?
As far as
signing
joining an agreement with Saudi Arabia to secure their oil and kind of have them on our side, I think it's a good thing.
Okay. Can you dive in? Why do you think it's a good thing?
Well, it's like you said. I mean, look, the Saudis have the ability to turn on their oil and increase output, kind of like a spigot, right? Where we can do similar things, but it's determined by the market. So when, if prices start getting high, it starts to become appetizing for American manufacturers or American oil producers to start poking holes in the ground and getting oil out of the ground. But that there's some lag time between when prices go up and when the oil actually starts to flow. Mm-hmm. Whereas the Saudis, it's a state-run organization. It's the Saudi Aramco is I mean, it's publicly traded, but it's owned by the government of Saudi Arabia. They can just go turn wells on that have been off for a long time. So they have like a lot of capacity in reserve, and it's immediate capacity. So take somebody like Russia, for example, and how we've been constantly talking about how we want to lower the price of oil and kind of force them out of the market. Well, you got Europe, who's looking for other places to purchase their energy, and Saudi Arabia, who is capable of just turning on the oil spigot whenever they want to. Right. So now you have, and the Saudis are not super friendly to Russia anyway. There was a big oil kind of market share war right around the time COVID hit, and that's when oil prices got down to like negative numbers.
Sure.
And that's because they were both trying to flood the market with oil, knock the U.S. shale producers out of the market. It didn't work. You're not going to make American shale go away completely, but the Saudis will absolutely play that game and try to steal that market share if they can. They want to anyway. And, you know, and the Saudis are in a pretty good position because they've done something the Russians haven't. They started to somewhat diversify their economy and get into like tech futures and things like that, and get involved in that kind of tech realm so where they can play with their oil market, and they can afford to do that more than the Russians can. Sometimes this, you know, price fixing essentially is what it is.
Yeah.
Pisses me off, but it can be used as a weapon. And when they use it for a weapon, it's you know, when we're using it for the right things, yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. And I just wanted to double check that Saudi Arabia is like #1 exporter of oil in the world, especially since like the sanctions from the US. And dude, I even forgot to bring this up. You actually used to work in the oil field. I don't think people actually know that about you. I think you've mentioned it before on the show, yeah, but I don't think people actually know that about you. So you're actually the perfect person to have on the show.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not like an oil investor. I'm one of the guys that worked on actually getting it out of the ground. But when your livelihood is based on what oil prices are going to be and how the market works, you tend to learn to pay attention to those things and kind of read the tea leaves. One of the things I saw just about a week ago is Saudi Arabia increased their output by 400,000 barrels a day, and it's supposed to go up to like 1 million or 1.5 million barrels a day here in a month or two. And when they do that, when the Saudis do that, that is, they're stealing somebody else's market share, right? The reason they do that is because there's a new market for them and there's availability, which means, and their primary kind of competitor for market share is Russia. Yep. So that means that the Russians are selling less, the Saudis are selling more. And since, you know, Russia and Iran kind of combined are probably the two biggest, you know, because of their relationship, I consider Russia part of the conglomerate that is the largest state supporter of terrorism. Yep. And they're committing it themselves, in my opinion. That's taking money away from terrorists and putting it in the hands of somebody who's not committing those terrorist acts. So it's a good thing.
No, I would agree. Now, there is something going around, and I looked it up. It's true that it would appear that the ODNI actually came out with a intel report that the Crown Prince, who Trump just sat down and signed this deal with, basically murdered a freaking journalist over inside of Turkey in 2018. Then come to find out the dude is like allegedly a member of the Muslim Brotherhood and a couple other things, and that he was strangled to death inside of their embassy. He showed up to the embassy in order to get the paperwork. Report from ODNI ends up saying that they are quite positive that the Crown Prince ended up ordering this, even though they end up denying it. They put 5 of the guys. What they ended up saying was that the Crown Prince himself did, like Saudi's official statement basically is that the Crown Prince did not order it, that they were acting, you know, on their own. Although ODNI comes over and ends up stating that, you know, basically that they don't do anything without his permission. And so is it a cover up? I don't know. But they put 5 guys on trial. They sentenced them to freaking, I think it was life in prison or death. And then they ended up getting their sentence commuted down to like 20 years over there. And people are pointing this to be like Trump's dealing deals with the devil. And so what I look at it and I go, listen, when you're looking at things through the lens of an American over inside of the Middle East, and you see things like that, you would think, yeah, absolutely, we're doing deals with the devil, right? And it's not okay for us to be taking part in those types of deals. But when you look at it and you actually have world experience, What my world experience has taught me is that we are always doing business with some of the most shady people on the freaking planet. Always. And I think if Americans knew the amount of people that we actually did deals like this with, that we actually cut deals with in order to advance America's agenda, national security policy, or quite frankly, like this deal that just affects the US dollar and the US economy, I think they would be a little bit shocked. Would you agree with that statement?
100%. But, you know, the thing that I think most people have to kind of consider when you're talking about these things is you're really picking a lesser of two evils.
Right.
So, yeah, it was, you know, the killing of Jamal Khashoggi probably a bad thing according to the American lens. Sure. Right. And that's according to the American lens. Like, we have a very different view on life and the value of it in the West that a lot of other people do. And it's really hard to kind of place our value systems on other people, right? It's that's a difficult thing to do. And our legal requirements, right? Like we're saying they need due process, and that's not the same thing in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, right? Due process doesn't happen the same way there that it does here.
No.
In that particular case, Jamal Khashoggi had dual U.S. citizenship, so that was part of the reason for the uproar. But, you know, yeah, is it good? No. But then look at the opposing side, right? If you're using a guy who does a bad thing, and if Jamal Khashoggi was legitimately part of the Muslim Brotherhood, I don't know if he was, but if he was, good riddance. You know what I mean? But then you look at the other side and you look at how many people the state of Iran has killed, how many people Russia's killed, and you got to pick. And sometimes there are no good choices.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I think, again, sometimes you have to do deals with the devil. And if he was a member of the Muslim Brotherhood, I could kind of care less. Things work differently in other countries. And I think Americans kind of like lose sight and track of that. And to me, it's one of those deals that's like, look, we thought it'd be a good idea to remove Saddam Hussein from power, and we did. And what ended up happening is we end up having this huge power vacuum that takes place over the Middle East. Same thing that I think would happen if India ends up writing on Pakistan, which is why I don't think India is going to completely overthrow Pakistan, nuke them, bomb the crap out of them, anything like that, and remove the current government from power because they have, what was it, 16 or 17 foreign terror organizations that are running around Pakistan. And so by backing some of these people, like, and I hate to say this, but sometimes it's better to do things like this. And number one, Trump just brought it up. It's going to bring millions of jobs to the U.S. So I can only assume, I heard that. Did you hear him say that in that statement that he was speaking to the public? He says it's going to bring millions of jobs to the U.S. Number two, if we have a energy partnership with the world's largest exporter of freaking oil, I can only assume that that's going to help drive prices even lower, affecting Russia even worse, right, than there already are, which is going to help Ukraine out. But three, it's going to prevent them from joining BRICS. And that is a big deal, in my opinion. Keeping Saudi Arabia out of BRICS, or even if they are in BRICS, let's say they choose to join BRICS, but we already have this agreement in place and they go back on it, maybe we have a little bit more ammo to help us out with in the future, because that's my big worry is BRICS goes after the petrodollar. You know what I mean? And if that ends up happening, our economy's SOL.
Yeah, I mean, that's BRICS' goal. That's their stated goal, right, is damaging the dollar. I don't think Saudi would ever do that. I mean, they're everything from their defense apparatus is pretty much reliant on the U.S. right now. If they did, it would take decades for them to kind of decouple themselves from the United States. And, you know, the U.S. or the Saudi is the biggest exporter of oil, and the United States is the biggest importer of oil. So it'd kind of be like, you know, giving the middle finger to your biggest customer, which is bad for business. And, you know, for all of Saudi Arabia's bad dealings in the past, they know how to do math. So the math doesn't add up with pissing off your biggest, most valuable customer.
No.
But this just kind of solidifies it further. So I think it's a good thing. And you know, and honestly, even if you just think about it regionally, outside of the BRICS equation, Saudi provides a really good counterbalance for Iran.
It does.
A strong Saudi is something to balance out Iran and prevent them from exercising their influence outside of the region, right?
Yeah. And India, again, largest importer of oil, right, from Russia. So like when we look at these things, like India ends up buying more oil from Russia. And so when we're looking at these things and we look at these oil deals, that's kind of my take on it, is we're going after the Russian economy. And every time we do things like this, it hits. Now, my question for you, because you're in the oil field, is do you think that us signing a agreement with Saudi Arabia that ends up allowing the U.S. to import even more or cheaper oil is going to directly impact jobs here in the United States of America? If we were to look at this in a balanced way, would that screw over American oil workers? Because he did say it's going to bring millions of jobs.
Well, so if oil gets too low, right, super low, probably below $40 a barrel, then it does start to impact American oil jobs. But I don't think we'll get that low, and I don't think we need to. That's the thing with what Saudi can do is, for the producers, you got to have enough price, enough value or enough dollar value per barrel in order to make money. But you don't want to price yourself out of the market either, right? So $120 a barrel oil, that's like $6 a gallon gasoline. People just stop driving, they stop traveling. And then, next to payroll for most companies, especially if you're like a manufacturer, your highest cost is like, think about a steel mill, right? Running electric furnaces. If you're running an electric furnace, your highest cost is energy.
Correct.
So, and then everything's made out of steel or plastic. All of these things require incredible amounts of energy to, like cement, concrete. Concrete production is one of the highest consuming industries for energy, right? It takes an incredible amount of energy to make concrete. So that's what everything's made out of. So that price is then worked into those products. And, if you're making a bid and you got to bid that job out, and that job includes that high energy price, sometimes people just say no, or they'll wait until the price comes down. So when you decrease that price of energy, it's factored into everything. I mean, even your eggs, right? When people are like, oh, the price of eggs, they got to drive on a truck to get to that store.
Correct.
Part of that cost is energy, right? In the gas that goes into it. So it does kind of bring down the cost of everything. And I think if you can get down to $45, $50 a barrel, number one, you're I mean, obviously I'm biased on this issue, but you are, pushing Russia's poop in, and you're benefiting the United States citizen every time they get in their vehicle, right? It just makes their daily life cheaper. So yeah, I think it's it makes a major difference, and people don't understand. Even if you're not in the oil industry,
Yep.
Like construction projects go up when energy prices are lower. So if you're a construction worker, that's a good thing. But even if you're not, even if you work in an office and you have nothing to do with that, everything you purchase starts to get a little cheaper, just because shipping and trucking get
when you start talking about oil prices going down, you start talking about like shipping costs, you start talking about the cost to move things across the country, you start talking about like all the truckers' costs that go down. It's better for the truckers. I've got buddies that are like their own independent contract, or their own, like most truckers have an LLC, and they end up just doing contracts and moving things from point A to point B. A good friend of mine was telling me that he is not basically taking some of these contracts because they're like paper thin margins when the oil prices were so high, and this was under Biden. But not that I want to get into politics and saying, Biden this and Trump that. I could seriously care less. I want to focus on what the end result of this is going to be. I went back and I checked oil prices, what the lowest were during COVID. And I was shocked because I remember it being extremely freaking cheap, right? Like I remember going into work, for those that don't know, I was in law enforcement back then. And I remember going into work and stopping at the gas station and paying like $2 a gallon for freaking like premium. You know what I mean? Like $2.50, like $2.30 for like premium fuel. It would like, it was nuts. But the roads were completely and totally empty. And the cost of crude oil per barrel fell all the way down to $37.63 on the 20th of April of 2020. It actually was trading in the negative at that point. And I can
there's a difference between futures prices and the fundamental value, the fundamentals. So It traded negative for, I think, a day, which is basically saying nobody was buying. Because when you look at futures prices in the stock market, that's people buying oil 90 days out. They're not going to see that oil for 90 days. And at that point, we were just, because nobody was driving and nobody was working and industry wasn't consuming fuel, we were running out of places to put it. So like literally running out of places to put it. And they were getting to where they were thinking about shutting in wells and turning stuff off, which is a problem. But yeah, it got down into the 30s. That's pretty damaging. There are some companies who are not so, like, I'm talking about oil producing companies who are not so over leveraged that can continue to produce at 30, but they are losing money. But there are some also really efficient companies, some of the smaller ones that are cash businesses, which means they own all their own equipment. They're not taking out loans to produce these wells. And some of those guys can actually make money at surprisingly low prices. So the company I was working for, we didn't shut down all through COVID. We kept going because they were still making money. And they weren't one of these guys like Chevron who had, billions of dollars.
Massive amounts. Yeah.
These massive reserves in the bank. It's the only way they're going to keep going is if they're making money. And it wasn't a lot. The margins were thin. But, like that company, for example, is doing fine and increasing their market value even at $45 a barrel or $40 a barrel. So it has to get down pretty low for some of these companies to dry up. The ones that really go away during those super low oil price times are the guys who started out with an investment companies, and they got investment firms to just throw them money. So they don't really own anything. They owe all of that back.
Okay.
And when prices get low, those investors start calling in, right? It's kind of like the stock market crash in 1929, where they're like, "Hey, screw this, sell it all. I want my money." And so the people that are like owners that own their company and they're operating, they're making money from previous wells, and then the other thing that happens too is sometimes with oil prices is you get guys. Like Southwest Airlines was known for doing this for when their prices were super cheap. It's because they had a long-term oil deal where they purchased oil for like 30 years.
Yep.
At a certain price, which was high at the time, but they were smart enough to realize that, like, look, in the future the price is going to go up. So they were still getting oil at like and their refined products from these refineries at like a really cheap prices. So they were able to get customers on the planes for cheap, and that happens sometimes too. Where some people will say, if you're a consumer of energy and you're going to be buying a lot of it, you can just lock yourself in at, say, $50 a barrel. And that's good for you. And you can predict you can make good, accurate financial predictions for your company because you know exactly how much you're going to be spending on energy for the next 5-10 years, something like that.
Yeah.
So if you're the producer that's supplying that people oil, you're also comfortable as well. And you don't really have to ebb and flow with the markets.
Now, something that I think people also forget about is the strategic oil reserve here in the United States of America. It got really low under Biden. I think it was sitting around like 20% at one point. And people were asking him to kind of like refill it. Today, currently, and I'm waiting on the numbers to come in, specifically for January 20th of 25. But right now we're sitting at right around 55%, like stocked up in the current like oil reserve. And under Biden, what ended up happening, because oil prices ended up going so damn high, was he ended up releasing a lot of our strategic stockpile in order to start driving those market prices low. That to me was an issue, and I think it was an issue to a lot of Americans when we're looking at Russia, when we're looking at the Middle East and everything else, right? So he ended up filling it back up. It looks like on January 17th, we were sitting right around 55%, so it hasn't moved at all, right? Like he ended up getting it from 20 back up to 55. Before he got out of office. And do you think that this might be an attempt by Trump to drop those oil prices and then buy up a shit ton of it really quick to fill up our oil, like our strategic oil reserve?
Well, that's what he did during his first term. Like when COVID was happening, and this is, it got kind of lost in the news, but since I worked in that industry, I was kind of aware of it. So when prices really started dropping on oil because industries, people weren't going to work. Trump did say, hey, oil prices are $30 a barrel. I'm going to buy all of it and fill up these strategic oil reserves. People thought he was stupid. I'm like, no, that's actually a brilliant idea, right? I mean, that kind of follows the buy low, sell high strategy of investing.
Right.
So he's like, the prices are low. It does two things. It fills the strategic oil reserve, and it kind of props up our oil industry in the meantime so they can get through this slump and keep working. Because that's the hardest part for any of these industries is if it slows down and you send people home, and then 6 months later, oil prices get really high, and you say to yourself, hey, we need to make more of this so we can drive the price down. All those guys have found other jobs, right? So it's really hard to get people to come back and go back to that work. You think about like your wife, if you finally got a job where you're working at, close to home, and then you got to argue with your wife about going back to the oil field and being, sitting on an oil rig for 2 weeks at a time. It's a pain in the ass. So, but those reserves, that's what I would do. But the thing is, I wouldn't use the strategic oil reserves is for wartime. That's not for
correct
intentionally messing around with market fluctuations. That's to use in case we go to war and somebody like Saudi Arabia or the Strait of Hormuz gets cut off, and we have something that our military can use until we figure that situation out and open things back up. So I think the key and what Trump should do instead of like opening up the strategic reserve is kind of, I don't want to say deregulate because it's bad. The oil industry does need some regulation. You can't just turn them loose and let them do whatever they want. You have like a bunch of Deepwater Horizon incidences. But what you can do is decrease the amount of fees they have to pay to the government in order to produce a well. And those fees can be significant sometimes. And basically, fees and permits are taxes, basically, right? So you're just giving them a tax abatement and be like, look, we want you to poke holes in the ground. We're incentivizing you to poke holes in the ground. And if you do that and you just get the hell out of the way of American industry, they'll produce the shit out of stuff. I mean, when Texas oil was at its peak, we were producing more oil than Saudi Arabia was, just in Texas. So, yeah, so then you have the Bakken, Pennsylvania, Colorado. There's a lot of other places where they're getting oil out of the ground. So when you take the entire American oil industry, just let them do what they want, and get the hell out of their way, they'll make a shit ton of oil. Excuse my language.
Right. So the next question is, and I'm glad you brought it up, that our strategic oil reserve is supposed to be for war, right? Like that's why we end up having it. So when that stuff happens, if we have an oil crisis during war, number one, our machines can still run, the U.S. can still function, and on and on and on. Do you think if he does do that, that it's a sign that we are worried about and or just preparing for something inevitable between Russia and or China, or getting us back involved in the Middle East?
I mean, look, if you're a student of history, right, war's inevitable.
Every 10 years, the U.S. averages a war until the global war on terror, which but every 10 years, the U.S. has averaged going to war.
Yeah. And I mean, look, so the GWOT, we were fighting a non-state actor, right? Like really non-state actors. I mean, we did topple the Ba'ath Party in Iraq, but the main part of that war and time was fighting insurgencies. And that's a rare thing throughout history too. So, likely the next war we have is going to be with a state. And the stakes are different there, especially if it's somebody like China. I mean, I think we'll, depending on what your goals are and what your definition of victory is, I think we'll, kick China's ass, to be honest with you. But that doesn't mean that comes without consequences and a price.
Right.
And, China can do things and screw up global markets. Iran can too. Like if we do start dropping bombs on Iran, that Strait of Hormuz is vulnerable, and it always has been. Mm-hmm. I mean, I remember when I was in the Marines and we were doing, ship operations in the Persian Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz was always like, I mean, it's a choke point. So it's kind of like a, an aquatic Thermopylae in a way where, it's a choke point and it's just easy to strike, and all of that oil has to go through there. So, yeah, it's very reasonable that if we get into some of these larger conflicts, that some of those things are going to be interrupted. And you're just smart. It's like having car insurance. I mean, why wouldn't you have? They built the strategic oil reserve for a reason, and it's not so presidents can just screw around with oil prices for political gain.
No, and that's what it's been used for historically, which is really freaking annoying for like political points.
Yes.
It's freaking annoying, to be perfectly honest. So let's put it this way. I think you and I have been talking about this for a while. Like, there is writing on the wall where we may inevitably end up going to war, depending on how some of these things end up playing out. Either war with Russia, which I don't want to see. I don't think that's something that Putin wants to get involved with. But it's very possible that he does something that ends up drawing in possibly some nations from the EU over into Ukraine as well. I don't think under Trump's presidency we're going to be putting boots on the ground in there. I think that's ridiculous for anybody to suggest. He's not going to allow it. He doesn't want it to happen. I don't care if Russia drops a nuke on Ukraine. I don't think the U.S. under this administration would go in there. I just don't. I think we would answer back in a very particular way. I think we'd end up providing more weapons, allowing Ukraine to open up on targeting and everything else. But it is possible. It is very possible that Russia does something a bit drastic, because what we're talking about doing right now with all of these oil, like everything that we've been talking about so far, you know, the freaking Red Sea, reopening the Red Sea, that ends up impacting Russia's freaking oil exports, right? Ends up pricing them out of the market. Unless there's a war, say, over inside of India where they need a buttload of oil, and then they're going to just be buying it up however, you know, Russia wants to price it within reason. But going over to Saudi Arabia and making a strategic deal with them ends up, you know, dropping the price of oil even more. So we're just hacking away at Russia's economy, right? Just hacking away at Russia's economy. And if we end up hacking it down to the point where they become desperate to where the ruble is going to collapse, I could see Russia doing something drastic. And that, I think, is kind of a concern, which is why it's important for us to stock up the freaking strategic reserve, but also to continue to make partnerships like this over across the Middle East. While I might not like everything Saudi Arabia does, while I might not like everything Qatar does, sometimes you have to dance with the devil in order to get things done.
No, I agree 100%. And like the thing about desperation is, I mean, it's not unprecedented in the past. I mean, you look at, like, if you go back in time to the Second World War, the Battle of the Bulge is, you know, everybody knows the story about Bastogne because they watch Band of Brothers. But the reality of that is the Germans were so desperate to get oil. As a matter of fact, it all goes back to energy. They were so desperate to get oil that they launched an attack to get to some oil fields. I'm going to screw it up if I try to name the place. But they were trying to reach that place. And any logical person would look at, you know, the resources the Germans had and the resources the good guys had, and they would say, dude, you can't do that. It's not going to work. It'll fail. You know what I mean? But they did it anyway because they were desperate. So you can't expect desperate people to think logically.
Nope.
And do logical things. So, you know, I also agree that the U.S. doesn't need to put boots on the ground in Ukraine. The Ukrainians can handle it if they have the equipment they need. And, you know, as far as war fighting goes, if you're trying to achieve a result, and that desired result is Russia can no longer continue to be an imperialist power in Europe, that's a pretty cheap bargain, right? When you don't have to send humans to go get it done, you just give things. You know, compared to having to send our own military over there, you know, part and parcel that's really a bargain. To achieve that result. But yes, the problem with them is they will get desperate, and desperate people do desperate things. And it's almost impossible to predict what that desperation will produce.
Yep, I agree. And so I think we're just setting ourselves up for success here and just making sure we're straight. I don't think it's a big deal. I don't think, let's put it this way. I think there is so much dang disinformation floating around the internet on all of these things that it is leaked into the minds of people that used to be right and or left leaning, that are now, you see this rhetoric being spit by everybody. And I've got a feeling, and I'd have to look into it, and I'd have to do a serious deep dive into it. And I think I would need technology like the freaking 3-letter agencies have in order to actually track it down, that you have people that are being paid to put this information out. And I've talked about this numerous times, to where you see across Ukraine, you see it across the war that's going on over in the Middle East with Israel and everybody that's surrounding them for the most part. All of this misinformation that comes out. Pete Hegseth, great example. You know, Pete canceled his trip and blew off Israel. And so now we're just not supporting Israel anymore. Turns out, no, Trump actually invited him to go. So he rescheduled and he went to Saudi Arabia and actually signed this freaking defense agreement. Right. So It is a big deal. And now Trump might actually be attending Israel with Hegseth, which is a bigger deal than just Hegseth going over there by himself. And, I saw the comments today as well that, hey, look, Netanyahu and Israel are completely and totally pissed off at Trump for making this agreement in order to get the U.S. hostage out of Gaza. Got it. Because we didn't coordinate with them, right? Like we weren't keeping them abreast until we had already secured the deal. And then we told them, hey, we've got it. And he's also a dual citizen of Israel and the United States of America. He was serving in the IDF at the time. He ended up getting taken EPW or captured or hostage, however you want to call it. But still, Netanyahu came out and he basically reaffirmed that, and he appreciated Trump and he reaffirmed everything, that our goal is to get them out. But we're like, Israel is not going to stop attacking Hamas.
No, it's silly to complain. Like, okay, our media, the media sucks. And the media's goal is not to bring you the news anymore, right? We've long left the days of Walter Cronkite. And the purpose of the media is to generate internet traffic.
Yep.
That's all it is. It's to generate clicks and to get views and to get ad revenue for their investors and their owners. That's it. They don't care. And how do they do that? Right? What's the most powerful motivator? It's fear. So fear is the strongest motivator. It drives people to pay attention. So these media organizations play on that fear, and they take every single situation and they spin it into something that's going to try to freak you out.
Correct.
So, there was another big thing that we left Israel out of. It was called the Persian Gulf War. And we specifically said, look, if you guys get involved, it's going to screw up our coalition. So we can't. And the Israelis are not dumb. They realize that like everybody around there hates them. That's why they're, slinging bombs into all of their neighbors right now. Because
in the position to where they are currently at. Yeah.
Absolutely. So they know that there's going to be situations where the locals don't like America either, but they hate us less than they hate the Israelis. So there's times where America can probably get more done if the Israelis aren't involved. Mm-hmm. So it's just silly to look. And, there's even media in Israel that also does the same thing, right? Their job is to spin shit. So they're spinning it. And it's just media spin. And you kind of have to learn to see through that spin and be like, okay, what's the real thing, right? Like,
right.
You can spin things to the point where napkins and swizzle sticks become cocaine and cocaine spoons. They're not. That was, they're not. It's stupid.
Yeah.
So just, kind of learn to read through the bullshit.
Yeah. And I got to thank Incog Faraday for gifting out 5 Speak the Truth memberships. He did a little bit ago, and I forgot to throw that out there. Tom Bones wants to know, he said, you mean Operation Desert Shield / Desert Storm? He would like you to clarify.
Yeah, the first Persian Gulf War. Yeah.
Right. Now, it's funny how I have been talking about misinformation the whole time. And in the comment section, as I brought that up, somebody actually commented, USS Liberty, never forget. I don't know how ridiculous. Like, I might just have to break down the USS Liberty, but at the same time, I feel like it's beating a dead horse. And it's bullshit propaganda that everybody ends up, pushing out. The fact is it was a U.S. intel ship. We had guaranteed to Israel that all of our people were out of the area, that we were hundreds of miles off the frickin' coast, that we were not over there, and this ship was unknown, and it was operating over in that area. It actually only had 2 50 caliber machine guns on it. It didn't look like a warship at all. And those pilots did eventually attacking it, and then they ended up discovering, hey, this is American, so they take it down. Right, so they stop attacking the dang ship. They end up putting it up on their plotting board where they have it. They lose contact with the ship. Like, I've read through all these dang things. They end up having a shift change over in what I would call a JOC, or a Joint Operations Center. They end up doing a shift change over inside of the JOC. Because the information was stale, they removed it from the board. And then, that they identified it earlier on before attacking it. Then they removed it from the board because that information went stale, as is like their SOP. And then they ended up identifying another ship, and then subsequently attacked it, and then discovered it was an American ship, and then actually ended up helping out with the entire dang thing. Like, it's not a big deal. It's now, green on blue. It happens all of the time.
It does. Like, I use this. It's people really underestimate how easy it is. And you got to think, this was when did this happen? In the 1960s?
67.
Yeah, 67. Like, do you think that, like, nowadays it would be really hard to do? But then you got to remember too, what about the fact that a U.S. Destroyer shot down a U.S. F-18 recently?
Right.
Right. Was that the Jews? You know what I mean? No,
Sure.
it wasn't. It's even with all our modern technology, it's hard to, like, it's so easy in a stressful situation to screw up. The first casualty I ever treated in Ukraine was blue on blue.
Yep.
Right? It was a Ukrainian machine gunner shot a Ukrainian, and it hit him in the arm. Luckily, he was okay, and he healed up. But like, it happens, right? And people want to like say, no, there's no way that could ever happen. Everybody's too professional. When you're stressed out and you're worried about dying, I mean, the whole point of the enemy's operations are to sow confusion in your ranks and to make it difficult for you to do your job, and it works sometimes. I mean, it's just a fact of life. Like, so yeah, I also saw somebody mention the USS Cole. I was on the USS Cole, so
Yeah.
Familiar with that.
Yeah, that was actually an interesting conversation to have with you. I think we actually had that conversation off camera, and then I asked you about it one day on camera. But yeah, the USS Cole incident, I think a lot of people end up forgetting. Do you want to touch on that, or?
I mean, I can I don't know. If somebody asks a specific question, I might, but I mean, I don't want to keep going over it and just kind of tell random stories,
Yeah, no, I mean, we could sit around and tell war stories all day long. Yours are actually stupid interesting. Yeah. Like some of the stuff you guys were doing back then was freaking wild. Oh man. Yeah. Okay. So ultimately, Saudi Arabia oil deal, good thing. Saudi Arabia defense agreement, good thing. Saudi Arabia energy, good thing. Right, bringing millions of jobs over to the U.S. if we're going to end up restocking the strategic oil reserve, as you said. When oil prices end up going down, if we end up, and I would assume under this administration that we're going to be buying U.S. oil in order to stock up the freaking oil reserve, that keeps those jobs secure. Did I kind of get your gist of that?
Yeah, correct. I did see one specific question about the USS Cole, and I would like to answer it, if you don't mind.
Yeah. What was the question?
Somebody asked, how did they get so close? Meathead asked, how did they get so close to the USS Cole? And you can go pull up on satellite photos, or I could and post it to my Twitter later. But there are refueling stations, and it's essentially like a gas station at sea. Aden Harbor is a pretty shallow body of water.
Mm-hmm.
So when you go to these refueling stations, obviously you don't just pull up next to it. I mean, these big naval vessels are not like a Corvette. Where you can just park it pretty easily. So you pull up fairly close to it, and then they will charter a local tugboat to push you up against this. And you actually stop, and they throw over refueling lines, and you hook it up, and they pump diesel into these destroyers. And they scheduled to do that there at Aden Harbor. It is a means of, like, at that point, the government that is now in the east of Yemen right now, that's been pushed out by the Houthis. So that government was our friends at the time. We had an embassy in Sana'a at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So we pulled this destroyer in, but as they say, loose lips sink ships. Someone found out that a destroyer was coming. So it was, Osama bin Laden and his crew. They sent a group of suicide bombers, and they found out which tugboat was chartered to push the USS Cole up against that refueling station, murdered the crew, loaded 700 pounds of RDX in the hull of that tugboat, pushed it up against the USS Cole, and detonated it.
Do we know where they got the RDX?
It was, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure the FBI knows, but I didn't. I just was security for those guys running around pretending like I was going to get violent if I needed to.
Yep. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And the people that were committing the violence already killed themselves. So yeah. Again, you look at these different events, and people like to point at them and try to say that, we shouldn't be over there, or that there's issues going on, or we are making deals with the devil. And, it's all, as far as I'm concerned, a load of freaking garbage. I've sat there over in a very popular Ukraine space on Twitter before, where you've got 800 plus people that are listening, and just listening to the narrative and how it's been twisted. with literally a bunch of false freaking propaganda and bullshit. I had to sit there and argue the other day on a panel that what we are doing over inside of the Middle East is directly impacting the conflict between Ukraine and Russia, or the war between Ukraine and Russia. And it's directly attacking Russia's ability to be able to wage war. And people are shocked by this. They're like, well, why isn't the U.S. government being more transparent about it? Because the U.S. government doesn't have to come out and announce it, and you shouldn't be announcing that you're doing those types of things. You know, if we go out and we say, hey, Russia, we're coming after your freaking, 30% of your, national expenditures, right? Or the 30% of your national budget, we're actually going after that by making all of these deals across the Middle East and making good strategic moves in order to shut you down. That would look very, very bad. And that would basically, like, Putin could call that an act of war, right? That we're supporting Ukraine, that's an act of war, blah, 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 blah. And they can come after us. But if we just say it as a guise of we're doing what's best for the U.S. economy, then he doesn't really have a leg to stand on.
Yeah, well, it's like Winston Churchill said, in war, the truth should always be surrounded by a bodyguard of lies.
Right.
Right. So if you think about it in other terms, like everybody kind of understands the kinetic part better than they understand the political part, because the kinetic part makes sense, right? You see a bad guy, you smash it. That's pretty simple. Mm-hmm. We all get the concept of that. But when it comes to the political part, you get if you think about the kinetic part and you say, like, one of the gripes that we had with the Biden administration, or that I have personally, is the fact that he would telegraph what he was doing, right? Yep. If they were going to send ATACMs, he'd be like, in 90 days exactly on this day, ATACMs will be there.
Correct.
And by the way, they can only shoot them 75 kilometers instead of 300 kilometers. And then the Russians would be like, cool. And they'd look at a line on the map and they'd just move all their shit to, 5 kilometers outside of the zone. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing with the political side of it and the financial side of it. If you telegraph what you're doing, you're going to give the opposing side the opportunity to come up with workarounds for whatever it is you're planning on doing. So just like you said, obfuscate it as, I'm just trying to help out American workers. And you are, right? You are helping out American workers. You're also shoving it to the guys that are, working against you. And they're left, like, the thing about when people complain about Trump being kind of confusing and wishy-washy in his messaging, I'm like, you know who else is confused? Our enemies.
And that's a good thing.
It is a good thing.
Well, it's like, I think it was like quoted in Call of Duty, like on the video game, that was like, basically studying American doctrine doesn't matter because the Americans don't even abide by their own doctrine. And that's quasi true. Like it's quasi true. Yeah. When I was freaking at war, you know what I mean? Like, it is a general guideline for what to do, but using what's between your two ears is what makes all of the difference on the battlefield. And I think that's where people get confused and they end up getting their teeth kicked in war, because they just think, okay, well, I'm supposed to do X, Y, and Z. Right. But when you apply common sense, you probably shouldn't do that. There's probably a better way to skin this cat. And that
100%.
That, in my opinion, is what we're doing on this international level now, where, sure, by, age-old, you can not even call them policies, just like general accepted norms of what we're supposed to be doing. Hey, we should inform Israel that we're, conducting these negotiations via Qatar, trying to get a U.S. hostage back. But maybe that's not going to work. So maybe we'll do something outside of the freaking norm in order to get our guy back, right? Hey, we should announce that we're going after Putin's oil, because that would show great support for Ukraine. Well, no, not really, because we don't want to broadcast, like you said, what freaking, like Biden did with the HIMARS and everything else. When I was a cop here in Colorado, they ended up saying that, anything under 4 grams, as far as a narcotic goes, ends up being a misdemeanor and not a felony. And so what did I see all the freaking dealers do? They ended up started packaging everything in 3.5 grams. That way, anybody that bought would just get slapped with a misdemeanor. And it's a selling point. Yeah. It's the same exact thing, but you're talking about a much broader scale as it goes out.
Exactly. It's bigger. And it, like, I'm not criticizing people. Like, I kind of understand the oil and gas industry because I worked in it. There's a lot of other markets and things like that I don't understand at all. And I can speculate on them and say what I think, but I probably don't understand them as well as I should. And, that's probably true for most people. If you're going to work and you're taking care of your kids and you're bringing them to school, And then all you see on the news is somebody who you think should know, and they're spinning it to be the scariest thing ever. And you go, well, fuck, maybe I should be afraid. You know, maybe I should be bothered by this. So I kind of understand it, but I also do think, you know, if you're an adult and you should take an interest and try to determine and dig deeper on things yourself. But as far as flexibility and having a doctrine, like, I mean, I remember in the Marines, they teach you skills, right? They teach you how to employ a machine gun or an artillery piece or whatever it is that is your job. And then, you know, they give you, like you said, general guidelines. This is a good place to start. But, you know, everybody, you know, the Marine Corps motto is Semper Fidelis, which in Latin means always faithful. But the kind of joke inside motto was Semper Gumby, always flexible, right? Always be willing to change. Never get married to your ideas or your concepts. And it's that like line, you know, no plan survives first contact. And it's, you know, once you get there, you just start to learn to adapt. And I think that's one of the greatest strengths of the American military is we have a really rapid OODA loop, and we can just pivot really fast. And that's one of our greatest strengths.
Yeah. I love seeing in the comment section right now, after I talked about, you know, like the dealers dropping everything down to like 3.5 grams as how they'd end up having it packaged. And everybody's like, that's already an 1/8. And I'm like, okay, well, when we start talking about meth, heroin, everything else, and you start seeing all of those like actual hard drugs getting dropped down to that extent, when before you'd end up, especially cheap ones like meth, you know, when normally you end up finding them, you know, like 10+ grams like on somebody, unless they've been smoking the shit out of it or shooting it for a long time. Yeah, no, it's different because now they're just buying a couple smaller ones and then they'll chuck one, like whatever. That was a thing.
Yeah. First of all, I want to know how many of your viewers and what their past looks like that they can just convert grams to imperial measurements without the aid of a calculator that rapidly. Like, what are you guys up to on the weekends, man?
I know, right? Yeah. When I see stuff like that, I'm like, yo, you guys.
Yeah, maybe your viewers like to party, you know what I mean?
Yeah, right. Well, and like I will say, even, you know, in it was freaking funny, I guess, to me. Yeah, I don't, like, as far as I go, I'm a constitutionalist, so I really don't care. You know, if you're not hurting anybody else and you get caught with some freaking crap on you, no, I don't have the brain capacity or the time, you know, for somebody that's already hooked on heroin that has a couple freaking, you know, grams of freaking heroin on him, to take him to freaking jail. Like, it's pointless to me. It's stupid. I'm not going to do it. Why? Yeah. Because it doesn't do anything. It hurts. Number one, hurts the taxpayer. Number two, it's not going to help the guy at all. He's going to end up going to jail. He's going to get out. He's going to have a warrant because he's going to FTA. He's going to fail to appear at his court date. And then he's just going to get locked up in the system, and round we go. So it's stupid to me. And when the government is signaling that they don't care about it by making laws like that, or the people of the state are signifying that they don't care about it because of things like that, no, I'm not going to waste my time on it. I'm going to stick to persons crimes and things that are directly impacting the public. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't see it that way. Tom Bones says, in World War II on D-Day, all we gave our soldiers were objectives, and we didn't say how to take those objectives. Ding, ding, ding. Thank you. Yeah. Why? So you know, we had a saying that was like a 70% plan violently executed, right? A 70% complete plan violently and properly executed is going to go better every time than a 90% complete plan poorly executed, right? And because you have to remain flexible in everything that you do. And oh, by the way, we also don't need to be announcing what we're doing to our enemies. That's what's great about what you and I are doing right now is we're seeing back and we're looking and we're saying, this is what the U.S. is doing. This is the actual impact it's going to have on the enemies of the United States of America. And this is why it's smart.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, like, I never wanted super detailed, like you know, you do want plans. You want to know what the objective is.
Yep.
But that's basically what it boiled down to. I'm like, I know how to do my job. Don't tell me how to do it. Tell me what you want done.
Correct.
You want me to put rounds on this place? Tell me that. And I'll find a place to do it from that's safe for me. And I will put rounds on that place. There was nothing on this earth that's going to prevent me from doing that other than death.
Yep.
So you just give me the objective and then shut the hell up and get out of my way.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and but yeah, and then let the war fighters do the war fighting.
Right. And I think that's, I mean, and I remember it from Trump's first term when he was going into office and they were asking him, they said, hey, you've never been a politician. We get it. You're a businessman. You've never been a politician. How do you plan on dealing with X, Y, and Z? It was during a debate. And he goes, I am not going to know everything, but I'm going to take those people that do know, that are experts in a particular field, and I'm going to put them in charge of that particular field. And I'm going to take their advice. And I'm going to back them up, basically, is kind of how we ended up coming about doing it. And we did end up seeing that. I ended up seeing that inside of the military to an extent. I also ended up seeing that like via the economy and different things that he ended up doing. And right now, what I think is we're seeing a lot of the radical, like what people would define as like really radical moves inside of our government. I went to go check up on something on a government website. The thing is currently under construction. It's down. I went over to ODNI's website. It's down. It's not even up right now. And I don't know if that's because of Doge or something else. But when I want to check facts, I want to go straight to the source and I want to see what the source has to say about things, right? So I think that a lot of the things that are happening are probably and likely because he's been getting advice to get these things done and giving the approval. Problem is, I think he's moving really, really fast, and that some of the people that are running things like Doge, for example, don't necessarily know what the hell they're turning off. And it's kind of creating a little bit of a problem. And it's going to be a hiccup going back and forth until they find like the right balance to make all of these things happen. The 7 Ps, piss, poor, planning. No. Prior planning prevents piss poor performance. 6 Ps. Prior planning prevents piss poor performance.
Prior proper planning prevents piss poor performance.
There we go. Yeah. That's what it is. Prior proper planning prevents piss poor performance. There it is. Yeah. It's been a while since I heard that. I'm glad you know it too. Yeah. Thank you, old school Nate.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Well, fucking grandpa over here. But yeah, no, I think, look, you're always going to have some bad with the good. And I mean, anytime you change something, you're going to, like if you have been lazy and you start going to the gym and start doing things to get in shape, you're going to be sore. Right. So it's kind of analogous to that, I think, and you're probably going to make some mistakes. If it's been a long time since you exercised, you're probably going to get some minor strains and injuries. Right. But as long as you're doing the right things to kind of fix those and let yourself heal up, I think in the long run, it's better to get to the gym than it is to just be like, well, I've been lazy for the last year. I may as well stay lazy. Like, yeah, that's not the right attitude to have.
Yeah, exactly, man. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and close this sucker out, Nate. You got any other closing thoughts on this as far as the deal with Saudi goes?
No, I would really like to see, I saw somebody that said we won't see anything lower than $55 a barrel. I think that's accurate, but mid $50 a barrel oil is a pretty good thing for the American consumer. So I just hope we see that. Even if you take all the geopolitics out of it, it's just, things are really expensive for people. So if we can get that price down and take some pressure off the average American person, I think that's a good thing, and I hope to see it.
Yeah. What type of like prices at the pump do you think they're going to see at $45 a barrel if it gets down that low?
Nationwide, it depends because the state taxes are so built into the price of oil. But I can use Texas as an example. So you'd probably see like high 2s somewhere in there instead of high 3s, which is what we're at now.
Yep.
So like, 260, 270 a barrel, something like that, or a gallon, excuse me. But it takes a little while for the old stock to get there, right? So you got to think the oil they're buying now, there's a giant pipeline of it. So when you see futures prices drop, that oil doesn't get to the refiner for 90 days. So, you know what I mean? There is a lag time in it, but even those futures prices, you start seeing more work being produced because the people that are doing these big like construction projects are seeing that, hey, by the time we break ground on this, we'll be paying less for energy than we are now. So yeah, you'll see those jobs getting approved and people getting put to work and things like that. And that's a good thing for everybody. So I hope to see it. I know Trump's never going to get credit for it. You know what I mean? The media is still going to beat him up no matter what. Sure. But like James Carville said, it's the economy's stupid. So the economy's stupid. It doesn't matter what the media says. The people will feel it. And that's, I want people to get a financial break. So
yeah, same. Nate, sir, thank you very much for your time. Have a good one, friend. I'll see you in a bit.
All right, you too.
Bye. Nate Vance, ladies and gentlemen. Nate Vance, always a pleasure to have him on the show. ladies and gentlemen, if you haven't yet, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Make sure your notification bells are turned on. I will see you guys again this evening. We'll be dropping a video as long as something pertinent ends up coming out. So be on the lookout for that. I'm adjusting the time for those video drops to evening time-ish, around 6 p.m. Central Standard Time. So be on the lookout for those. If something pertinent goes out, I will make sure I drop a video on it. Make sure you go over and check out the video I did yesterday on the hostage release over from inside Israel. In the meantime, ladies and gentlemen, peace, love, happiness,